The rain came down in sheets so thick that Nathan Morrison could barely see 10 feet ahead through the towering pines. But he spotted her anyway, a flash of pale fabric against the dark forest floor as she bent over a cluster of plants growing near the base of an ancient Douglas fir. He reined in his horse and watched for a moment, rain streaming from the brim of his hat, as the woman worked with steady determination despite the downpour that had turned the mountain trail into a muddy stream. She wore a simple cotton dress that clung to her frame, her dark hair plastered against her neck and shoulders, and she seemed completely focused on gathering whatever herbs grew in that particular spot, oblivious to everything else around her, including the approaching stranger on horseback. Nathan had been living in these mountains outside Wallace, Idaho, for going on 3 years now, and he knew better than most that spring storms in 1876 could turn dangerous fast. The temperature had already dropped since the rain started, and he could see the woman shivering as she worked. He dismounted, his boots squelching in the mud, and led his horse closer. She must have heard him coming because she straightened suddenly and turned, her eyes wide with alarm as she took in his size. Nathan knew he cut an imposing figure at 6'4" with broad shoulders and arms thick with muscle from years of chopping wood, hauling water, and wrestling with the land itself. His dark hair hung past his collar, and several days of stubble shadowed his jaw. He raised one hand slowly, wanting to show he meant no harm. "Easy now," he said, his voice low and calm like he was approaching a skittish deer. "Name is Nathan Morrison. I have a cabin about 2 miles up the mountain. This storm is only going to get worse, and you are going to catch your death out here." The woman clutched her basket of herbs against her chest, water dripping from the woven willow branches. Her lips had taken on a faint blue tinge, and her whole body trembled. "I need to finish gathering," she said, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely get the words out. "The yarrow only grows in certain places, and I need it for medicine." "What you need is to get dry and warm," Nathan said, but he could see the stubborn set of her jaw even through the rain. He had grown up with 3 sisters back in Missouri, and he recognized that particular expression. This woman would not leave until she had what she came for, no matter how miserable she got. He sighed and looped his horse's reins around a low branch. "All right then. Where do you need to look?" She stared at him, confusion replacing some of the fear in her eyes. They were green, he noticed, the color of new leaves in spring. "What? For your yarrow or whatever else you are gathering. Where should we look?" "2 people can cover more ground than one, and the sooner we find what you need, the sooner we can get somewhere dry." Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She seemed to be weighing whether to trust him. Finally, she gestured toward the eastern slope. "Yarrow grows in the meadows and clearings, especially where the ground drains well. I also need more golden seal, which prefers the shade near streams." Nathan nodded. "There is a clearing about a 1/4 mile that direction," he pointed northeast, "and a good stream runs through the gully beyond it. But first, let me rig up something to keep the worst of this rain off you, or you will not make it another hour." He moved to his horse and untied the oilcloth he kept rolled behind his saddle, along with a coil of rope. The woman watched with cautious interest as he quickly located 4 young saplings growing close together in a rough square. Working with the efficiency of someone who had spent years living in the wilderness, Nathan strung rope between the trees at about 7 feet high, then draped the oilcloth over it, securing the corners to create a slanted roof. He used rocks to weigh down the lower edge on one side, leaving the other sides open for easy access. The whole shelter took him less than 10 minutes to construct, and while it would not keep someone completely dry, it would provide significant protection from the driving rain. "There," he said, straightening up and wiping water from his face. "Now you have a place to store what you gather and somewhere to take a break if you need it." The woman stepped closer to examine his handiwork, then looked up at him with an expression that held both surprise and gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "That was kind of you. My name is Caroline Parker." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Parker," Nathan replied. Something in the way she carried herself and the simple gold band on her left hand made him ask, "Or is it Mrs. Parker?" Her face tightened and she touched the ring almost unconsciously. "It was. My husband died last winter. Fever took him." "I am sorry for your loss." She nodded, accepting the condolence, then seemed to shake off the sad memory. "I work as a healer in Wallace. People depend on me, and I ran low on several important medicines. I thought I would have time to gather what I needed before the storm hit, but it came on faster than expected." Nathan understood. Wallace was a mining town, growing fast as silver strikes brought in more people. A healer would be vital to a community like that, and if she had promised to help folks, she would do everything in her power to keep that promise, even if it meant risking her own well-being. It was both admirable and frustrating. "All right then," he said. "Let us find your herbs." They worked together through the rain, Nathan following Caroline's directions as she explained what each plant looked like and where it typically grew. He had spent enough time in the wilderness to recognize many common plants, but Caroline possessed knowledge that went far deeper. She could identify a dozen different species that all looked like generic weeds to him, and she explained which parts had medicinal value and how they should be harvested for maximum potency. In the clearing, they found yarrow growing in abundance, its feathery leaves and white flower clusters visible even in the gray light. Caroline showed Nathan how to cut the stems at the right length, leaving enough of the plant to grow back. Her hands moved with practiced skill despite the cold and wet, and Nathan found himself watching the delicate way she handled each stem, checking it carefully before adding it to her basket. "You have been doing this a long time," he observed. "My mother taught me," Caroline said, not looking up from her work. "She was a healer too, learned from her mother before her. I have been gathering herbs since I was old enough to walk." They filled her basket with yarrow, then moved toward the gully where the stream cut through the forest floor. The water ran high and fast from the rain, splashing over rocks and fallen logs. Caroline led the way along the bank, searching the shaded areas beneath overhanging ferns and moss-covered stones. When she found a patch of golden seal, she made a small sound of satisfaction and knelt in the mud to carefully dig around the roots. Nathan crouched beside her. "Show me what to do." She glanced at him, seeming to reassess him once again. "You have to be careful not to damage the roots. They contain most of the medicine. Use your hands to loosen the soil, then lift the whole plant gently." He did as she instructed, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he worked the earth. When he lifted the golden seal free, roots intact and trailing soil, Caroline smiled for the first time since he had found her. The expression transformed her face, making her look younger and chasing away some of the exhaustion that lined her features. "Perfect," she said. "You are a quick learner." They harvested more golden seal, moving along the stream bank until they had gathered enough to replenish her supplies. By then, the rain had intensified into a genuine downpour, and the temperature had dropped enough that Nathan could see his breath. Caroline was shaking so hard she could barely hold her trowel. "That is enough," Nathan said firmly. "We are heading back to that shelter now, and you are not going to argue with me about it." To his surprise, Caroline nodded without protest. She must have been even colder than he thought. He took her basket, which had grown heavy with wet herbs, and put his other hand under her elbow to steady her as they made their way back through the forest. She stumbled twice, and the second time Nathan simply swept her up into his arms, basket and all, and carried her the rest of the way. She made a small sound of protest, but did not fight him, instead curling against his chest as if seeking whatever warmth his body could provide through their wet clothes. When they reached the makeshift shelter, Nathan set Caroline down gently on the driest patch of ground beneath the oilcloth. He retrieved a blanket from his saddlebag and draped it around her shoulders, then began gathering dry wood. The rain had soaked everything, but Nathan knew where to look for dead branches that remained relatively dry in the centers of dense thickets and beneath thick bark. He worked quickly, building a small fire just outside the shelter where the oilcloth would protect it from the worst of the rain, while still allowing the smoke to escape. Getting the fire started took longer than usual with everything so damp, but Nathan had good flint and steel and the patience to coax reluctant flames to life. Once he had a small blaze going, he added more wood carefully, building up the heat. The fire hissed and popped as moisture evaporated from the wood, but it held, and soon warmth began to radiate into the shelter. Caroline had pulled the blanket tight around herself, watching Nathan work with an expression he could not quite read. When he settled back on his heels, satisfied the fire would keep burning, she spoke quietly. "You did not have to do all this for a stranger." Nathan met her eyes across the small fire. "Could not very well leave you to freeze, could I? Many men would have." He shook his head. "Then they would not be much in the way of men, would they?" Something shifted in her expression, a softening around her eyes. "Where did you come from, Nathan Morrison? You do not talk like most mountain men I have met." "Missouri originally. Had some education before I came west. And you?" "You have a touch of the East in your voice." "Pennsylvania," Caroline confirmed. "Philadelphia. I came west with my husband 5 years ago. He wanted adventure, wanted to make his fortune in the mines." Her voice grew bitter. "He found hard work and an early grave instead. But you stayed." "Wallace needs a healer, and I have nowhere else to go." She pulled the blanket tighter. "My family disowned me when I married Thomas. They said he was beneath our station, that I was throwing away my future. Perhaps they were right, but I loved him, and I do not regret the choice even if it did not end the way I hoped." Nathan added another piece of wood to the fire. "Love is worth the risk, seems to me, even when it brings pain." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the rain drum against the oilcloth and the fire crackle. Steam began to rise from their wet clothing as the heat did its work. Color slowly returned to Caroline's face, and her shivering subsided. She pulled her knees up to her chest and rested her chin on them, looking young and vulnerable in the firelight. "Tell me about your cabin," she said eventually. "You said it is 2 miles up the mountain." Nathan nodded. "Built it myself when I first came to Idaho. Nothing fancy, but it keeps the weather out and has a good stove. I trap mostly, sell the furs in Wallace every few weeks, hunt for my meat, grow what vegetables I can in the short season. It is a simple life, but it suits me." "Why did you leave Missouri?" The question hung in the air between them. Nathan considered how much to share, then decided this woman who had been honest about her own losses deserved honesty in return. "My wife died," he said quietly. "Childbirth. The baby, too. After that, I could not stand to be around all those memories, all those well-meaning folks telling me time would heal the pain. I needed space and silence to grieve in my own way. Found both in these mountains." Caroline's expression filled with understanding and sympathy. "I am so sorry." "That must have been unbearable." "It was for a while. But living out here, working with my hands, being surrounded by something bigger and older than my grief, it helped. I will never forget her, but I can live with the memory now instead of drowning in it." "How long has it been?" 4 years come September." Caroline nodded slowly. Thomas has been gone 6 months. Some days I wake up and forget he is gone, reach across the bed expecting to find him there. Then I remember, and it is like losing him all over again. That gets better, Nathan said gently. Not easier exactly, but the remembering stops feeling quite so much like a knife in your chest. You learn to carry it differently. I hope so. She looked at him across the fire, her green eyes luminous in the flickering light. Thank you for telling me that. People in town treat me like I am made of glass now, like I might shatter if they mention Thomas's name. But I need to talk about him, need to remember he was real and we were happy for a while. Then talk about him, Nathan said simply. I am listening. So Caroline talked. She told Nathan about meeting Thomas in Philadelphia, about their courtship and secret meetings because her family disapproved. She described their wedding with only a few friends present, the thrill of boarding the train west together, and the challenges they faced building a new life in Wallace. Thomas had been optimistic and hardworking, but not particularly skilled at mining. They struggled financially, but Caroline's healing practice had kept them afloat. She spoke about the fever that took him, how she had tried everything she knew to break it, how helpless she felt watching him slip away despite all her knowledge and skill. Nathan listened without interrupting, occasionally adding wood to the fire, letting her words flow. He understood the need to speak a lost loved one's name, to keep their memory alive through stories. When she finally fell silent, there were tears on her cheeks, but her expression seemed lighter somehow, as if sharing the weight of her grief had made it slightly easier to bear. He sounds like he was a good man, Nathan said. He was, not perfect, but good where it mattered. Caroline wiped her eyes with the corner of the blanket. What was your wife's name? Elizabeth. Lizzie to her friends and family. She had red hair and laughed like music. Made the best apple pie in 3 counties. Nathan smiled at the memory. She was scared of spiders but would face down a charging bull to protect something she loved, stubborn as the day is long. She sounds wonderful. She was. They sat together in shared understanding, 2 people who had loved and lost, finding unexpected comfort in each other's company. The storm continued to rage around them, but the shelter held firm and the fire kept them warm. Nathan noticed that full darkness had fallen while they talked. The trail would be treacherous now, muddy and slick. You cannot go back to Wallace tonight, he said. Too dangerous in this weather and in the dark. My cabin is closer and the trail is one I know by heart. You can stay there until morning when the storm clears. Caroline hesitated. I do not want to impose. You would not be. I have a spare room and you can sleep without worrying about propriety. I give you my word I will be a gentleman. She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. Thank you. I confess I am exhausted, and the thought of trying to make it back to town right now fills me with dread. Nathan stood and began breaking down the shelter, folding the oilcloth and coiling the rope with practiced efficiency. He helped Caroline to her feet, noting that she still seemed unsteady. Without asking permission, he lifted her onto his horse, then handed up her basket of herbs before taking the reins to lead the animal. I can walk, Caroline protested weakly. Save your strength, Nathan replied. The trail is steep in places, and I would rather you rode. He set off through the darkness, navigating by memory and instinct as much as by sight. The rain had eased slightly to a steady drizzle, but the ground remained treacherous. True to his word, Nathan knew the path intimately, adjusting his course to avoid washouts and slippery rocks. His horse followed trustingly, and Caroline swayed in the saddle but held on. The cabin appeared suddenly in the darkness, a solid square shape with light gleaming faintly through gaps in the shutters. Nathan always left a lamp burning low when he went out, a habit from his married days when Lizzie had worried about him returning to a dark house. He tied his horse under a lean-to shelter, then helped Caroline dismount. Inside, the cabin was simple but well-maintained. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, and a cast-iron stove sat in the corner for cooking. Rough-hewn furniture filled the space, including a sturdy table, 2 chairs, and a rocking chair near the fireplace. 2 doors led to smaller rooms at the back. Everything was clean and organized, showing a care that went beyond mere survival. Nathan stirred up the fire and added fresh wood, then lit several additional lamps to chase away the shadows. "Bedroom is through that door," he said, pointing. "I will sleep out here tonight. There should be a dry nightshirt in the chest at the foot of the bed if you want to get out of those wet clothes. I will heat some water so you can wash up, and I will make us something hot to eat." Caroline looked around the cabin with obvious approval. "You have made a real home here. Try to keep things comfortable." Nathan hung his wet coat on a peg by the door and moved to the stove. "Nothing fancy, but I have venison stew I can heat up, and I made bread yesterday." "That sounds like heaven." Caroline hugged herself, still wrapped in the damp blanket. "I cannot remember the last time someone cooked for me." Nathan glanced at her over his shoulder as he worked. "You need someone to look after you now and then, seems like. All that taking care of other folks, who takes care of you?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. "I manage." Managing and thriving are 2 different things. Before Caroline could respond, Nathan poured hot water from the kettle into a basin and carried it to the bedroom along with a towel and a bar of soap. When he returned, he busied himself with the stew, giving her privacy to change and clean up. The smell of heating food filled the cabin, rich and savory, making his own stomach growl. He realized he had not eaten since morning. Caroline emerged wearing his nightshirt, which hung nearly to her ankles and billowed around her small frame. She had washed her face and combed her fingers through her damp hair, and despite her exhaustion, she looked more at ease than she had all evening. Nathan tried not to notice how pretty she was with the lamplight catching in her dark hair and color back in her cheeks. "Better?" he asked. "Much." "Thank you." She sat at the table, tucking her feet under her. "I hung my dress near the fire. I hope that is all right." "Of course." Nathan ladled stew into 2 bowls and cut thick slices of bread. He set one bowl in front of Caroline along with the bread, then took the other seat. "Go ahead and eat. You must be starving." They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that comes when people are truly hungry and the food is good. Nathan had learned to cook well during his years alone, finding it a meditation of sorts to prepare meals with care, even though he typically only fed himself. He watched Caroline eat with obvious appreciation, finishing her bowl and accepting seconds without hesitation. "This is delicious," she said between bites. "You are full of surprises, Nathan Morrison. Had to learn to take care of myself out here. Could not live on hardtack and jerky alone." Still, most men would not bother. They would eat whatever was easiest and call it good enough. Nathan shrugged. "Life is hard enough without making it harder on yourself. Good food, a clean home, these things matter even when you are alone. Maybe especially then." After they finished eating, Nathan washed the dishes while Caroline sat in the rocking chair near the fire, her eyes half closed. The heat and the food had made her drowsy, and she looked like she might fall asleep right there. Nathan dried his hands and moved to bank the fire for the night. "You should get some rest," he said gently. "It has been a long day." Caroline nodded and stood, swaying slightly. Nathan steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "I do not know how to thank you properly for everything you have done today," she said, looking up at him. "You likely saved my life out there. Anyone would have done the same. We both know that is not true." She reached up and touched his bearded cheek briefly. a gesture of affection and gratitude. "You are a good man, Nathan Morrison." Then she turned and disappeared into the bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. Nathan stood for a moment, his cheek tingling where she had touched him, something stirring in his chest that he had not felt in a very long time. He shook his head, trying to clear it. Caroline was grieving and vulnerable, and he would not take advantage of that. She needed help and friendship, nothing more. He spread his bedroll near the fire and settled in, but sleep eluded him for a long time. He kept thinking about Caroline's green eyes and the way she had smiled when he successfully harvested the golden seal, the trust she had shown by coming to his cabin, the grief they shared. Finally, as the fire burned down to embers and the rain drummed steadily on the roof, exhaustion claimed him. Nathan woke at dawn to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a disoriented moment, he thought he was back in Missouri and Lizzie was making breakfast. Then memory returned, and he sat up to find Caroline at the stove, still wearing his nightshirt, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked over at the sound of his movement and smiled. "Good morning. I hope you do not mind, but I woke early and thought I would make myself useful. I found the bacon and eggs and I started coffee." Nathan stood and stretched, his joints popping. "You did not need to do that. You are a guest. A guest who owes you more than she can easily repay. Let me at least feed you breakfast." She turned back to the stove, flipping the bacon with a practiced hand. "Besides, it feels good to cook in a real kitchen. My place in town is tiny, just a room with a small stove. This is luxury by comparison." Nathan pulled on his boots and went outside to check on his horse and take care of his morning chores. The rain had stopped during the night, and the early morning sky showed patches of blue between scudding clouds. Everything dripped and steamed as the sun began to warm the wet earth. The air smelled clean and fresh, pine and damp soil and growing things. When he returned inside, Caroline had set the table with plates of eggs and bacon, thick slices of toasted bread, and mugs of strong black coffee. They sat together and ate, the morning light streaming through the windows and painting everything gold. Nathan could not remember the last time he had shared breakfast with someone, and he found he liked it more than he expected. Caroline seemed more relaxed this morning, less haunted, though shadows still lingered in her eyes. "The weather has cleared enough for travel," Nathan observed. "I will take you back to Wallace after we eat." Something flickered across Caroline's face, disappointment perhaps, but she nodded. "I should get back. People will be wondering where I am, and I am sure someone will need my services before long. Tell me about your work in town. You mentioned you are a healer, but what exactly does that involve?" Caroline wrapped both hands around her coffee mug, seeming to gather her thoughts. "Everything, really. I treat injuries from the mines, set broken bones, deliver babies, mix medicines for various ailments. Wallace does not have a proper doctor, so I am the closest thing they have. Most folks cannot afford much, so they pay what they can, sometimes with money but often with food or services. I get by. Just getting by is not much of a life. It is enough." But her voice lacked conviction. "I help people and that matters. It has to be enough." Nathan wanted to argue, to tell her that she deserved more than just surviving, but he held his tongue. They had only just met, and he had no right to tell her how to live her life. Still, the thought of her struggling alone in a cramped room, working herself to exhaustion for people who could barely pay her, bothered him more than it should. After breakfast, Caroline changed back into her dress, which had dried overnight though it remained wrinkled and stained with mud. She gathered her basket of herbs carefully, checking each plant to ensure none had been damaged. Nathan saddled his horse and helped her mount, then swung up behind her. With both of them riding, the horse moved more slowly, but Nathan did not mind. It meant more time with Caroline pressed against his chest, more time before he had to say goodbye. The trail down the mountain looked different in daylight, showing evidence of the previous night's storm in the form of small washouts and fallen branches. Nathan guided his horse carefully, one arm around Caroline's waist to steady her. She fit against him perfectly, her head barely reaching his shoulder, and he found himself noticing details he had missed in the darkness and urgency of the previous evening. The way her hair curled slightly at the nape of her neck, the faint scent of herbs that clung to her despite their soaking, the delicate bones of her wrists. "Nathan," Caroline said after they had ridden in silence for a while, "do you ever get lonely up here by yourself?" He considered the question carefully. "Sometimes. Less than I used to. I needed the solitude after Lizzie died, needed to be away from people and their expectations. But lately, I have been thinking maybe I have been alone long enough." "What changed?" "Not sure exactly. Just a feeling that has been growing. Life is short, as we both know too well. Seems wasteful to spend all of it hiding from the possibility of hurt." Caroline twisted slightly to look back at him, her green eyes serious. "That is a brave way to think. I am not sure I am there yet. You will be, when you are ready." They descended through the forest as the morning grew brighter and warmer. Birds sang in the trees, and a deer bounded across the trail ahead of them. By the time they reached the outskirts of Wallace, the town was fully awake with people moving about their business. Wallace had grown substantially in recent years, wooden buildings packed close together along muddy streets, the constant sound of hammering and sawing as more construction continued. The mine works dominated the eastern edge of town, skeletal frameworks against the mountainside. Caroline directed Nathan through the streets to a small building near the center of town. A hand-painted sign reading "Healing Services" hung beside the door. Nathan helped Caroline dismount and handed down her basket of herbs. "Thank you again for everything," Caroline said, looking up at him with an expression that held warmth and something else he could not quite identify. "I do not know what I would have done without your help yesterday. You are welcome." Nathan found himself reluctant to leave, searching for a reason to prolong their time together. "Those herbs you gathered, will they need processing or drying or something?" "Yes, quite a bit of work actually. I will be up late tonight preparing everything properly. I could help if you want." "Many hands make light work, and I am a quick learner, as you saw yesterday." Caroline's face brightened. "Would you really? I would appreciate that more than I can say. Most of the work is tedious and it would go much faster with two people." "What time should I come by?" "After the dinner hour." "Say around 7, Nathan nodded, a warmth spreading through his chest at the prospect of seeing her again so soon. "I will be here." He watched her disappear inside with her basket, then turned his horse back toward the general store. He needed to pick up some supplies anyway, and now he had a reason to make sure he had enough provisions to stay in town overnight if needed. The store was well stocked, run by a portly man named Henderson who knew everyone's business. "Morning, Morrison," Henderson greeted him. "Do not usually see you in town in the middle of the week. Everything all right up at your cabin?" "Fine. Just needed a few things." Nathan gathered flour, sugar, coffee, and a few other staples, trying to ignore Henderson's curious looks. "Heard you rode in with Caroline Parker this morning." That caused some talk. Nathan kept his expression neutral as he paid for his purchases. "Found her gathering herbs in the rain yesterday. Storm was too bad for her to make it back to town safely, so she stayed in my spare room. Nothing improper about it. Did not say there was." Henderson's eyes gleamed with gossip-hungry interest. "Just unusual is all. Caroline keeps to herself mostly since Thomas died. Good to see her getting out, spending time with folks again. She seems like a fine woman and a dedicated healer. That she is. Delivered my youngest grandson just last month. Mother and baby both doing well thanks to Caroline's skill. Henderson bagged Nathan's purchases. Town is lucky to have her, though I worry she works herself too hard. Nathan agreed but did not say so aloud. He took his supplies and left before Henderson could dig for more information. The rest of the day passed slowly as Nathan completed his errands and found ways to fill the hours until evening. He got a shave and a bath at the barber shop, had his horse reshod, and ate a late lunch at the town's small restaurant. All the while, his thoughts kept returning to Caroline and the evening ahead. When 7 o'clock finally arrived, Nathan knocked on the door of the healing house. Caroline opened it immediately, as if she had been watching for him. She had changed into a clean dress of dark blue cotton and pulled her hair back into a practical braid. Her face lit up when she saw him. "Right on time," she said, stepping back to let him enter. "Come in." The interior of the healing house was one large room divided into functional areas. A narrow bed stood in one corner for patients who needed observation, and shelves lined with bottles and jars covered 2 full walls. A large workbench dominated the center of the space, currently covered with the herbs they had gathered the previous day. A small living area in the back corner held a cot, a trunk, and little else. Nathan realized with a shock that this single room was Caroline's entire home. She must have seen his expression because she said a bit defensively, "I know it is not much, but it serves my purposes. All the space is dedicated to my work, which is as it should be." "You deserve a real home," Nathan said quietly. "A place with a kitchen and a bedroom with space to breathe." Caroline looked away, busying herself at the workbench. "I told you, this is enough. Now let me show you what needs to be done with these herbs." She spent the next hour teaching Nathan the delicate work of processing medicinal plants. The yarrow needed to be bundled and hung to dry in a specific way to preserve its properties. The golden seal roots required careful cleaning and slicing before being laid out on drying racks. Each plant had its own requirements, and Caroline's knowledge was encyclopedic. Nathan listened carefully, his large hands proving surprisingly deft at the fine work. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side at the long bench. Caroline told stories about various plants and their uses, about patients she had treated and close calls she had experienced. Nathan found himself fascinated by her dedication and knowledge. She had clearly devoted her entire life to healing, and her skill was impressive. "Did you ever think about going somewhere with more opportunity?" Nathan asked as he bundled yarrow stems. "A bigger city where you could establish a proper practice, maybe work with other doctors and learn even more," Caroline shook her head. "Wallace needs me. In a city, I would be one healer among many. Here, I make a real difference. Besides, this is where Thomas is buried. I cannot leave him." Nathan wanted to point out that Thomas was gone and she was still living, that staying in Wallace out of obligation to a memory was not the same as building a real life, but he kept silent. Some lessons people had to learn for themselves. As the evening wore on and the work continued, their conversation deepened. Caroline asked about Nathan's life before Elizabeth died, and he found himself sharing memories he had not spoken aloud in years. He told her about growing up on a farm in Missouri, about his parents and siblings, about the simple happiness of his brief marriage. She listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she truly cared about the answers. In turn, Nathan learned more about Caroline's privileged upbringing in Philadelphia, the education she had received that was unusual for a woman of her time, and the scandal her marriage to Thomas had caused. Her family had been wealthy and socially prominent, and her choice to marry a common man with ambitions of Western fortune had been seen as an unforgivable betrayal. They had cut her off completely, and she had not spoken to any of them in 5 years. "You miss them?" Nathan asked. "Sometimes. I miss my mother especially, but they made their choice and I made mine. I do not regret it." She set down the golden seal root she was slicing and looked at him directly. "Do you regret coming west?" "No. The grief would have destroyed me if I had stayed in Missouri. Out here, I found a way to survive it, to keep living even when living seemed impossible. These mountains saved me in a way." "I think I understand that." Caroline's voice was soft. "My work saved me after Thomas died. Having people depend on me, having a purpose, it gave me a reason to get out of bed each morning when all I wanted to do was sleep forever." They worked until nearly midnight, finally finishing the last of the herbs. Everything hung drying or lay arranged on racks, ready to be stored once fully dried. Nathan helped Caroline clean the workbench and sweep the floor, then stood awkwardly by the door, reluctant to leave. "Thank you for your help tonight," Caroline said. "The work would have taken me days on my own." "You have been incredibly kind. It was my pleasure." Nathan turned his hat in his hands. "Caroline, I would like to see you again. Would that be all right?" She studied his face, her expression unreadable. "Why?" The direct question caught him off guard. "Because I enjoy your company. Because talking with you is the most alive I have felt in years. Because when I look at you, I see someone worth knowing better." Color rose in Caroline's cheeks. "Nathan, I cannot offer you anything. I am still grieving Thomas, still trying to figure out who I am without him. It would not be fair to you. I am not asking for promises or commitments, just permission to spend time with you to get to know you better. Let me court you properly, Caroline. No pressure, no expectations beyond seeing where this might lead." She bit her lip, clearly torn. "I have not thought about being with another man. It feels disloyal somehow. Thomas would not want you to be alone forever. I did not know him, but if he loved you as he should have, he would want you to be happy. You sound very sure of that." "Because I know I would want the same for Elizabeth. If our positions were reversed and she had survived while I died, I would haunt her from beyond the grave if she did not eventually let herself live and love again." Nathan smiled slightly. "Love is not a finite resource, Caroline. Caring for someone new does not diminish what you had with Thomas." Tears shimmered in Caroline's eyes. "When did you become so wise?" 4 years of solitude gives you a lot of time to think." She laughed, a watery sound, and wiped at her eyes. "All right. You may court me, Nathan Morrison. But slowly. I need time. You can have all the time you need." He left the healing house walking on air despite the late hour. The night was clear and cool, stars blazing overhead in the vast western sky. Nathan found a room at the town's small boarding house and lay awake for hours, his mind full of green eyes and quiet laughter, of shared grief and the tentative possibility of future joy. Over the following weeks, Nathan became a regular fixture in Wallace. He made the 2-mile ride down from his cabin several times a week, always finding excuses to stop by the healing house. Sometimes, he brought Caroline fresh meat from his hunting or vegetables from his garden. Other times, he simply offered his help with whatever tasks needed doing, learning more about her work and her world with each visit. Caroline seemed to bloom under the attention, though she remained cautious. They took walks through the town and along the mountain trails, always properly chaperoned by the presence of others or the openness of their surroundings. They shared meals and conversation, learning each other's rhythms and preferences. Nathan discovered that Caroline loved wildflowers and had a surprisingly sharp wit that emerged when she felt comfortable. Caroline learned that Nathan could carve intricate figures from wood and had a beautiful singing voice that he was shy about using. The town gossips had plenty to say about their budding relationship, but Nathan ignored the talk, and Caroline seemed to do the same. What mattered was the growing connection between them, the way Caroline's smile came more easily now, the way Nathan found himself thinking about a future that included more than just surviving alone in the mountains. 2 months after their first meeting, Nathan took Caroline on a picnic to the same clearing where they had gathered yarrow in the rain. This time, the weather was perfect, warm sunshine, and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. Nathan spread a blanket under the trees and unpacked the lunch he had prepared: fried chicken, fresh bread, cheese, and wild berries he had picked that morning. Caroline sat beside him on the blanket, her face turned up to the sun. She wore a dress of pale green that brought out her eyes, and her hair fell loose around her shoulders at Nathan's request. She looked younger and happier than the rain-soaked woman he had first encountered, though the shadows in her eyes had not entirely disappeared. "This is perfect," she said, accepting the plate Nathan offered. "Thank you for bringing me here. I wanted to show you how beautiful this place is when the sun is shining. When I found you here in the rain, I thought it was a miserable spot, but I was wrong." They ate and talked about small things, comfortable with each other in a way that felt both new and ancient. After the meal, Caroline lay back on the blanket and looked up at the sky through the pine branches. Nathan stretched out beside her, propping himself on one elbow so he could look at her face. "Caroline," he began, his heart suddenly pounding, "these past weeks have meant more to me than I can properly express. You have brought light back into my life in ways I did not think possible. I know we agreed to take things slowly, and I do not want to rush you, but I need you to know that my feelings have grown beyond simple friendship." Caroline turned her head to look at him, her expression serious. "Nathan, I need to be honest with you. I care for you deeply. You have become one of the most important people in my life, but I am scared. Scared of losing someone again, scared of betraying Thomas's memory, scared that I do not have it in me to be the kind of partner you deserve." Nathan reached out and took her hand gently. "I am scared too. Loving someone again means risking that terrible pain of loss. But Caroline, we both know that life is uncertain and death comes for everyone eventually. The question is whether we let fear keep us from living fully while we have the chance. When did you decide you were ready to risk it again?" "The moment I saw you in the rain, determined to finish your task despite the cold and the storm. Something in me recognized something in you, and I have not been the same since." Caroline sat up, pulling her hand from his, and Nathan's heart sank, thinking he had pushed too hard too fast. But instead of pulling away, she cupped his bearded face in both her hands and looked at him with an intensity that stole his breath. "I am not ready to marry again," she said quietly. "But I am ready to admit that I have fallen in love with you, Nathan Morrison, completely and terrifyingly in love. And yes, it scares me half to death, but there it is." Nathan felt joy explode in his chest like fireworks. He covered her hands with his own. "That is more than enough for now. I love you too, Caroline. We will figure out the rest as we go." She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. Nathan wrapped his arms around her and held her close, feeling like he had been holding his breath for years and could finally exhale. They stayed in the clearing until the sun began to sink toward the western peaks, wrapped in each other's arms, talking about dreams and possibilities, and the future they might build together. As autumn approached and the aspens turned gold on the mountainsides, Nathan and Caroline's relationship deepened. They were inseparable when Nathan came to town, and Caroline began making the journey up to Nathan's cabin on her rare days off. She loved the solitude and beauty of his mountain home, the way the silence felt peaceful rather than lonely, the careful way Nathan had built a life there. One evening in late September, as they sat on the porch of Nathan's cabin watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Caroline turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Nathan, I have been thinking about something, and I want to discuss it with you. All right." He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Wallace is growing fast, and more people arrive every week. The town needs more than just me to handle all the medical needs. I have been training a young woman named Sarah to help me, and she is learning quickly. With her assistance, I would not need to be in town every single day." Nathan's heart began to beat faster. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that maybe I do not have to live in that cramped room above my healing house forever. Maybe I could have a real home somewhere with a kitchen and a bedroom and space to breathe." She looked at him meaningfully. "Maybe I could have a home with someone I love." "Caroline Parker, is that a proposal?" She laughed. "I suppose it is in a roundabout way. I know traditionally the man is supposed to ask, but nothing about us has been traditional. So yes, Nathan Morrison, I am asking if you will marry me and let me share your life and your home." Nathan pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she squeaked in protest. "Yes," he said against her hair. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. I will marry you and you can share my home and my life and everything I have." They were married in October of 1876 in a simple ceremony in Wallace with half the town in attendance. Caroline wore a dress of deep blue silk that Nathan had ordered specially from Denver, and Nathan wore his best suit with his hair trimmed and his beard neatly groomed. The local minister performed the ceremony, and if anyone thought it was too soon after Thomas's death, they had the grace not to say so aloud. After the wedding, Nathan carried Caroline over the threshold of the cabin that would now be their shared home. He had spent weeks preparing for her arrival, building a proper bedroom with a real bed frame and mattress, installing shelves for her books and supplies, and adding a covered porch where they could sit together and watch the seasons change. "Welcome home, Mrs. Morrison," he said as he set her down gently. Caroline looked around the cabin with shining eyes. "Our home. That sounds perfect." Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. Caroline continued her healing work in Wallace, making the journey to town several times a week with Nathan accompanying her whenever possible. She trained Sarah, and eventually 2 other apprentices, slowly building a network of healers who could share the burden of caring for the growing population. Nathan continued his trapping and hunting, but also began taking on carpentry work in town, discovering he had a talent for building and repair that was much in demand. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, how to navigate disagreements and compromise on decisions. Caroline taught Nathan about herbs and healing, and he taught her about wilderness survival and animal tracking. They worked together on improving the cabin, adding a proper kitchen, and eventually a second bedroom for guests. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Nathan carving while Caroline mended or prepared medicines, comfortable in the shared silence. The first winter was harsh, with heavy snows that sometimes kept them isolated for days at a time. But Nathan had prepared well, and they never lacked for food or firewood. If anything, the forced closeness brought them even nearer, and Caroline later said those snowbound weeks were some of the happiest of her life. Spring came again, and with it, wonderful news. Caroline discovered she was pregnant. The joy was tempered with fear, both of them remembering their lost first spouses and the dangers of childbirth. But Caroline was healthy and strong, and Nathan was determined to ensure she had every care and support. As Caroline's belly swelled with their child, Nathan found himself building a cradle from golden pine, carving it with intricate designs of mountains and forests, flowers and animals. He worked on it in the evenings, pouring all his hopes and dreams into the wood. Caroline would watch him work, one hand resting on her rounded stomach, a soft smile on her face. "You are going to be such a wonderful father," she told him one night. "I hope so. I am terrified I will do everything wrong." "You will not. You are patient and kind and strong. Our child will be lucky to have you." In January of 1878, on a night when the northern lights danced green and silver across the sky, Caroline went into labor. Nathan had arranged for Sarah and an experienced midwife named Mrs. Chen to be present, and they took over with calm efficiency. Nathan held Caroline's hand through the long hours, wiping her face with cool cloths and telling her how brave she was, how much he loved her, how proud he was of her strength. Just before dawn, their son was born, red-faced and squalling with a powerful set of lungs. Nathan held the tiny boy with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as he looked at the miracle of his child. Caroline lay exhausted but smiling, reaching out to touch the baby's impossibly small fingers. "He is perfect," she whispered. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names endlessly, but in that moment, looking at his son's face, Nathan knew. Noah Thomas Morrison. Caroline's eyes filled with tears. "After Thomas, he was part of your life and part of what made you who you are. It feels right to honor that." "Thank you," Caroline said softly. "That means more than you know." Little Noah proved to be a healthy, happy baby who quickly wrapped both his parents around his tiny fingers. Nathan discovered reserves of tenderness he had not known he possessed, spending hours rocking his son or singing to him in a low rumble that Noah seemed to find soothing. Caroline nursed and cared for the baby with the same dedication she brought to her healing work, though Nathan insisted she take time off to simply be a mother without the added burden of tending to others. As Noah grew from infant to toddler, the Morrison cabin rang with laughter and life. Nathan expanded their home again, adding a larger bedroom for Noah and eventually starting work on a second floor. His carpentry business had grown successful enough that he no longer needed to trap, though he still hunted for meat to feed his growing family. Caroline eventually opened a larger healing house in Wallace, properly staffed with her trained apprentices. She worked 2 days a week in town and spent the rest of her time at home with Noah and Nathan. The balance seemed to suit her, allowing her to continue her calling while also having the family life she had never quite achieved with Thomas. When Noah was 3 years old, Caroline became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she was not worried about proving herself or juggling too many responsibilities. Nathan had learned from their first child, and he knew how to support Caroline through the discomforts and worries. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1881, arriving with far less drama than her brother. They named her Rose Elizabeth Morrison, honoring Nathan's first wife while also celebrating the wild roses that grew in such profusion around their mountain home. Where Noah had been energetic and loud from birth, Rose was contemplative and quiet, watching the world with solemn gray eyes that matched her father's. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, seasons passing with their familiar rituals. Nathan taught Noah to ride and hunt and track, passing on the skills that had allowed him to survive in the wilderness. Caroline taught both children about plants and healing, taking them on herb-gathering expeditions that became treasured family adventures. Rose showed an early aptitude for the work, carefully memorizing the names and properties of dozens of plants before she turned 5. Wallace continued to grow around them, transforming from a rough mining camp into a proper town with schools and churches, shops and services. The Morrisons became respected members of the community, known for Nathan's craftsmanship and Caroline's healing skills, but also for their obvious devotion to each other and their children. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nathan and Caroline returned to the clearing where they had first gathered herbs in the rain, where he had built her a shelter and helped her collect what she needed. They had left Noah and Rose with Sarah for the day, stealing this time alone to remember and celebrate. "You ever regret it?" Nathan asked as they stood hand in hand in the dappled sunshine. "Marrying me, leaving your work in town to live on a mountain?" Caroline laughed and turned to face him, reaching up to touch his face. Gray had begun to streak his dark hair, and lines had formed at the corners of his eyes, but to her, he was as handsome as the day they met. "Not for a single moment. Nathan, you gave me a life I did not know I could have. You showed me that it was possible to grieve what I lost and still build something new and beautiful. You did the same for me. After Elizabeth died, I thought that part of my life was over forever, but you proved me wrong. We healed each other," Caroline said softly. "Two broken people who found wholeness together." Nathan pulled her close and kissed her, slow and sweet, pouring a decade of love and partnership into the gesture. Around them, the forest whispered its secrets, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk called. This place where they had met, where she had been gathering healing herbs in a storm and he had appeared like an answer to an unspoken prayer, would always be special to them. As the years continued to pass, Nathan and Caroline watched their children grow into capable, caring young people. Noah inherited his father's size and strength, eventually standing even taller than Nathan's 6'4". He worked alongside his father in the carpentry business while also pursuing his own passion for breeding horses. Rose followed in Caroline's footsteps, becoming a skilled healer in her own right, and eventually taking over much of the daily operation of the Wallace Healing House. In 1890, when Noah was 21, he married a schoolteacher named Anna who had come west from Ohio. Nathan and Caroline welcomed her into the family with open arms, and within a year, they were grandparents to a baby boy named James. 2 more grandchildren followed in quick succession, and the Morrison cabin became the center of a growing family network. Rose married at 23 to a young doctor who had recently arrived in Wallace. His name was David, and he had trained in Chicago, bringing modern medical knowledge that complemented Rose's traditional herbal expertise perfectly. They built a small hospital together, the first in Wallace, and continued expanding the healing work that Caroline had started all those years ago. Nathan and Caroline settled into the comfortable rhythm of their later years, their love deepened by decades of shared experience. They still took walks together every evening when weather permitted, still sat by the fire in the winters trading stories and comfortable silence. Their bodies showed the wear of hard-lived lives, Nathan's hands gnarled with arthritis and Caroline walking with a slight limp from an old injury. But their connection remained as strong as ever. On a summer evening in 1896, as the sun set over the mountains in a glory of orange and gold, Nathan and Caroline sat on the porch of their cabin surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Noah was teaching young James to whittle, the way Nathan had once taught him. Rose and David were discussing a difficult case with Caroline, seeking her wisdom and experience. Anna was cradling the newest addition to the family, a granddaughter named Caroline. Nathan looked around at the scene with profound satisfaction. From that rainy day 20 years ago, when he had found a stubborn woman gathering herbs in a storm, his life had expanded beyond anything he could have imagined. He had found love again, when he thought that part of his life was over. He had built a family, created a home, and made a difference in the world through his work and his children. Caroline must have sensed his thoughts because she reached over and took his hand, squeezing gently. When he looked at her, she smiled, and in that smile, he saw everything. The young widow he had sheltered from the rain, the wife who had shared his joys and sorrows, the mother of his children, the grandmother spoiling the next generation, and the love of his life who had walked beside him through 2 decades of adventure and growth. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. "How lucky I am. How that rainy day changed everything." "I was just thinking the same thing. If the storm had not caught me, if you had not come along that particular trail at that particular time, none of this would exist." "Do you believe in fate?" Nathan asked. Caroline considered the question. "I believe that sometimes when we are ready, the universe brings us what we need. I needed healing and hope and someone to show me it was possible to live again. You needed the same. We found each other at exactly the right moment." Nathan raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Here is to rainy days and chance meetings, to healing herbs and mountain shelters, and to the love that grew from all of it." "Here is to us," Caroline agreed, her green eyes still bright and full of life. "Always and forever us." They sat together as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to emerge, surrounded by the family they had built and the love they had nurtured for 20 years. The mountains stood eternal around them, witnesses to their story, and the wind through the pines sang a song of home and belonging. Nathan Morrison had come to these mountains a broken man, seeking solitude to nurse his grief. He had found purpose and peace in the wilderness, but it was not until Caroline Parker entered his life that he truly found healing. She had been gathering herbs that rainy day, searching for medicine to help others, but in the end, they had become medicine for each other, each one healing the wounds the other carried. Their love story was not the quick passion of youth, but the deeper, more enduring connection of 2 souls who had suffered loss and emerged stronger for it. They had built their life together with care and intention, brick by brick and day by day, creating something that would endure long after they were gone through the children they raised and the example they set. As the years continued to unfold, Nathan and Caroline remained devoted to each other and to the family they had created. They celebrated birthdays and holidays, mourned losses and celebrated victories, always together, always partners in every sense of the word. Their children and grandchildren knew them as the foundation of the family, the love story that had started it all, the couple who proved that second chances were real and beautiful. When Nathan was 68 and Caroline was 65, they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together 3 generations of Morrisons. The cabin and the surrounding property, which now included several additional buildings for their growing family, rang with laughter and music. Noah and Rose had arranged for a photographer to come from Wallace, and the resulting image captured Nathan and Caroline seated side by side, his arm around her shoulders and both of them smiling with genuine joy. That photograph would hang in the Morrison family homes for generations to come, a testament to enduring love and the power of 2 people to heal each other and build something lasting. It captured not just 2 people, but the culmination of 3 decades of partnership, growth, and devotion. Nathan lived to be 73, passing peacefully in his sleep on a winter night with Caroline beside him, as she had been for 35 years. His last words to her were simple: "Thank you for the life we built together. It was more than I ever dreamed possible." Caroline lived 3 more years, continuing to work with Rose in the healing house until just weeks before her own death. She passed away on a spring morning surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and her final words were about Nathan. "Tell him I am coming. Tell him to wait for me." They were buried side by side on a hillside overlooking the cabin they had shared, with a view of the mountains they both loved. Their graves stood as a landmark for the family, a place to return to and remember the love story that had started it all. The epitaph Caroline's children chose for their shared headstone was simple but perfect. "Together again, forever home." The healing house that Caroline founded continued to operate for another 50 years, eventually evolving into the hospital that served Wallace and the surrounding region. The carpentry business Nathan built became a family enterprise that lasted 4 generations. But more important than any business or building was the legacy of love they left behind, the proof that loss did not have to be the end of the story, that healing was possible, and that 2 broken people could come together and create something whole and beautiful. Their descendants would tell the story for generations. How Nathan Morrison found Caroline Parker gathering herbs in the rain, how he built her a shelter and helped her collect more, how that simple act of kindness sparked a love that would endure beyond death itself. It was a story about second chances and new beginnings, about the courage it takes to risk loving again after loss, and about the healing power of 2 people who see each other's pain and choose to walk forward together anyway. In the clearing where they first met, where Nathan had once strung up an oilcloth shelter to protect a stubborn woman from the rain, wild roses eventually grew in profusion, blooming every spring in a riot of pink and white. The Morrison family came to call it Caroline's Meadow, and it remained a special place, a reminder that sometimes the most profound changes in our lives begin with the smallest acts of kindness. A hand extended in the rain, a shelter built against the storm, and 2 hearts willing to risk love one more time.